Hello. In this video, I'd like to address the school shooter, usually a high school student who returns to their high school and engages in a multiple homicidal incident. And so let's look at some of the characteristics. I'm going to go ahead and get right to the FBI profile, which is from O'Toole's work, The School Shooter, a Threat Assessment from the FBI, published in 2000. And it's a very comprehensive approach. And I'm going to focus on some of the characteristics. Certainly, this doesn't mean that if someone has a lot of these characteristics, they're going to be a school shooter. And also, there may be cases where there are school shooters who don't seem to have these characteristics and end up engaging in violent behavior. But often we see low frustration tolerance and poor coping skills, that we see failed intimate relationships, and the person feels there's been a host of injustices against them. They may have clinical depression. They also may think extremely highly of themselves. That may be consistent with a narcissistic personality disorder. They may also be alienated from their family and their peers. They may dehumanize others as part of their uh, alienation and narcissistic processes. They tend to lack empathy toward others. They tend to have a sense of entitlement and a sense of superiority over others. They often have a pathological need for attention and tend to blame their own problems on others, external lies, as we might say. They tend to have low self-esteem, which they mask, and often anger management problems. They're intolerant. They may have inappropriate sadistic type humor. They may manipulate others. They often do not trust others, and they may have a very small, closed social group. They may also be very interested in violence and have violent negative role models, as well as family problems and access to weapons. They may also, basically, as the FBI report points out, rule the roost at home. They may watch very violent media and may create their own violent videos, as we've seen in some of the cases. The school may tolerate their disrespectful behavior, and they rarely have discipline um, in the school or at home. And when they do make threats, or they begin to become disturbed, or they begin to show signs they may become violent, there's often a code of silence among students who don't want to tattle or tell. They're also involved in a student pecking order. Often the school shooter has either been bullied or bullies or both. They may also use alcohol and drugs, and they may look at others who have engaged in school shooting and want to follow some of their behaviors. And so that's the FBI profile that kind of helps us. Again, those characteristics are of troubled adolescent, but not necessarily school shooter. But that could be certainly some red flags, some warning signs. I would say. I think one of the studies that has impressed me the most has been Harding Fox method, studying rare events through qualitative case stories. Qualitative case studies. Lessons from a study of rampage school shootings from sociological methods and research back in 2002. And they also published a book about school shootings. And they point out that there's 5 major factors related to school shootings, and I want to mention those briefly. First is gun availability, that the school shooter has easy access to weapons, and often uh, high-powered guns and weapons and ammunition, and they may also be very skilled at using a gun and have engaged in maybe hunting and target practice, and also they may have engaged in video games where they have become proficient by using guns in video games. Secondly, there is a cultural script that supports school shootings in some of those situations, as if that when there are problems and when there's troubles, that the solution is to use violence and maybe even gun violence or threats using guns and the like. So there's a cultural script that supports school shooting in the school and in the peer group of the perpetrator. The third factor is that the school shooter tends to have a marginal social position. At least that is how they view themselves. And fourth, there is a individual problem that occurs that seems to kind of set them over the edge. Now, there's been ongoing problems, perhaps, but there's an event that seems to be the marking event for that particular perpetrator, that they're going to, they make a decision to engage in violent homicidal behavior. And finally, there's the failure of the school to identify a student at risk, and that's another problem as well. And certainly, I've seen cases before where there are students who show a variety of danger signs, and those go unheeded and are not addressed. And parents may or may not know. It depends on their relationship with their kids, if they can note changes. And what I have found in reading the literature, if some parents have been horrified by their kids' homicidal behavior and want to do everything they can to explain and to tell us about what happened so it can be prevented. And then there's other parents who seem to not want to talk at all. And we have to wonder if there's certain family characteristics that might be associated with a school shooting occurring, or stopping a school shooting from occurring, and preventing that. So there still needs to be some more research, but I think Harding et al.'s work is extremely instructive and helpful in that regard. And the FBI profile and characteristics of a school shooter also is helpful. Again, it helps us to understand some risk factors and maybe some things to do within the school system to decrease the risk of school shootings. And this wraps up this video.